Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with the next video in the countdown towards the resumption of the 2020 Candidates Tournament, which was cut short in March because of the COVID-19 pandemic. On Chess to Impress, we're counting down towards the great event by looking at the 29 earlier candidate cycles in the history of the World Championships. This is episode number 15. And you can find a link to the earlier episodes up here. It started in 1883 in the tournament in London. Zukerstort and Steinitz occupied the first two places. They played the first official World Championship match 3 years later. Steinitz gained a rematch against world champion Lasker in St. Petersburg 1895-1896, and Paul Keres from Estonia won the tournament in the Netherlands 1938 and gained the right to challenge world champion Aljechin for a World Championship match. That match never happened because of World War II. The first official candidates tournament was held in Budapest and Moscow 1950. David Bronstein was the winner. Vasily Smyslov won two candidate cycles in Zurich 1953 and Amsterdam 1956 to challenge world champion Botvinnik. Misha Tal was Botvinnik's next challenger, and Tigran Petrosyan also played against world champion Botvinnik and dethroned him in 1963. Boris Spassky also won two candidate cycles in 1965 and 1968, and Bobby Fischer beat Tigran Petrosyan in Buenos Aires 1971, and that resulted in the match of the century the year after against Spassky. Anatoly Karpov beat Viktor Korchnoi in Moscow 1974 to challenge world champion Bobby Fischer. Fischer did not play, Karpov became world champion by default. Viktor Korchnoi won the two next cycles for matches 2 and 3 against Karpov, which he both lost. Garry Kasparov came on the scene in 1984. It is there in red because we're going to look at a game from that candidate cycle. Kasparov became world champion in 1985, but Karpov came back by winning the next two cycles, and then it was Nigel Short who challenged Kasparov. Anand was Kasparov's next opponent, and Alexei Shirov should have challenged Kasparov for the world title after beating Vladimir Kramnik in 1998. But Shirov never got a match. Kramnik did, and became the 14th world champion in the year 2000 by beating Kasparov. Peter Leko was Kramnik's first challenger, and in Elista 2007 there was a qualifying tournament for the World Championship tournament, which was won by Anand. Aranyan, Gelfand, Grishuk and Leko qualified for that event. Topalov, Gelfand and Carlsen were Anand's next opponents. Carlsen beat Anand. Anand came back for a rematch against Carlsen. Carlsen won again, and Karyakin and Karana were the last two opponents of world champion Magnus Carlsen. So who will it be? Yekaterinburg 2020. It's all going to start again on Sunday, November 1st. Very exciting. The winner will challenge Magnus Carlsen for the world title. As said in this video, we're going to look at the 1982 to 1984 candidate cycle. There were 3 interzonals, and this is the table from the Las Palmas interzonal where Ribli and Smyslov, yes, he was in his 60s, but he still qualified for the candidates matches. The second interzonal was held in Moscow, and Kasparov and Belyatsky qualified from that interzonal for the candidate matches. And the last one was in Toluca in Mexico, and Portisch and Torre qualified for the candidate matches. These 6 interzonal qualifiers were joined by Viktor Korchnoi and Robert Hübner, the candidates finalists from the previous cycle, and these 8 players participated in a series of knockout candidates matches. And this is the bracket. Kasparov beat Belyatsky in the quarterfinals, Korchnoi beat Portisch, Ribli beat Torre, and Hübner and Smyslov ended at 7-all. And how was this match decided? Not by rapid or blitz games, but by a little roulette ball. And Smyslov was the lucky one. Hübner had already left. He did not stay for this drawing of lots. A very odd way to finish a candidates match. In the semi-finals, Kasparov beat Viktor Korchnoi. We're going to look at a game from that match in this video. And Smyslov, yes, the old warrior, reached the candidate final by beating Ribli. In the final, Kasparov was too strong for Smyslov, and he qualified to challenge world champion Anatoly Karpov. And after many adventures, he became world champion the year after. I cover all the World Championship match in a series which I did building up to the Carlsen Kairana World Championship match. I'll put the link up here. As said, in this video we're going to look at a game from the Kasparov-Korchnoi match. And we're going to look at Game 1 played on the 21st of November 1983. White Garry Kasparov, black Viktor Korchnoi. Kasparov had a rating of 26.90 at the time. Korchnoi had 26.10. Kasparov was the favorite. But Korchnoi had all the experience of World Championship matches. Let's see what happened. d4 from Kasparov in this Game 1. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3 and b6. Bishop b4 check instead was Korchnoi's most preferred move in those days, so he surprised Kasparov early in this game. b6 was move 3. Knight c3, bishop b7 and a3, keeping the bishop out of b4. That would put even more pressure on the e4 square. d5 from black. C takes d5, knight takes d5, and here queen c2 is the more dynamic continuation, as Kasparov writes in his book My Great Predecessors. I take Kasparov's comments from that game for this video. But in a game, e3 was played. And now g6, Kasparov writes a surprise. The move was already known, but Kasparov explains that he had not studied it yet seriously. This move abruptly changes the pattern of the position. It leads to a kind of Grunfeld Indian setup. Now it is hard for white to build up a combined attack in the center and on the king side, which is precisely what I had been successful with, says Kasparov. He also says that Korchnoi keenly sensed that I would become nervous. Bishop e7 was the move that Kasparov had expected. But g6 was played, and here h4 is an option, or knight takes d5, as Kasparov explains, but he played bishop b5 check in the game. c6 to shield the check, bishop back to d3, bishop g7, fianchettoing, e4, kicking the knight, knight took on c3, b takes, and c5. Kasparov writes, black's fianchettoed bishops strike with great force at the opponent's center. An excellent version of the Grunfeld for black. Bishop g5 with a tempo, the queen is attacked, queen d6, e5, attacking the queen again, and here queen d5 is possible, but Korchnoi wanted to provoke Kasparov into making the following reply, and he played queen d7 instead, a provoking move. Korchnoi was provoking this move and Kasparov played it, d takes c5. Korchnoi writes, this move is hard to understand. And Kasparov says, was it worth voluntarily breaking up my pawn center? I was thinking of rapidly relieving the situation, and as often happened with me at the time, I underestimated the dynamic factors of the position. After all, Kasparov was only 20 years old. Korchnoi castled, and it's important that you don't take back the pawn instead, because then there is bishop b5, bishop c6, and a4. And only black may have problems, explains Kasparov. And that's why Korchnoi castled first. C takes b6, a takes b6, yes, white has won a pawn. Kasparov castled, and queen c7, immediately attacking the weak pawns on c3 and e5, and preparing to bring out the queen's knight. Korchnoi writes, for the pawn, black has gained pressure on white's weaknesses and a successful development of his pieces. It is clear that white cannot hold on to his material advantage. Kasparov played bishop b5, and he immediately gives up on the e5 pawn. He tries to exploit the activity of his pieces and black's momentary lag in development. At this point I had already used more than 2 hours, whereas Korchnoi had used 4 minutes, but now he went into the tank and took 50 minutes for his next move, writes Kasparov. And after 50 minutes, Korchnoi came up with bishop takes e5. Taking the bishop is not good, because then there is queen takes e5, and that's attacking both undefended bishops. Black will win material. So after bishop takes e5, bishop h6 was played by Kasparov. Bishop g7, Kasparov says, having obtained a permanently better pawn structure, Korchnoi wants to avoid any lack of clarity and to decide the outcome with the help of simplification and purely technical means. Yes, indeed, white has two weaknesses on a3 and c3. Kasparov took on g7, king takes. After the exchange of the dark squared bishops, white has the opportunity to create counterplay on the weakened dark squares, explains Kasparov. He played queen d4 check, king back to g8, and knight g5, and that's an incorrect route for the knight. Knight e5 should have been played, explains Kasparov. This centralization would have given an attack sufficient for a draw. After missing this opportunity, white completely concedes the initiative to his opponent with that knight g5 move. The knight got kicked, knight e4, and Korchnoi took on e4. With the exchange of this powerful knight, all my hopes of an attack disappear, says Kasparov. Queen takes and knight a6 with an exclamation mark. It's better than knight d7 to develop that knight because of bishop takes, queen takes, and then queen e3. And this double attack on b6 and h6 saves white. That's why in this position the knight had to be developed to a6 and not to d7. Very instructive. Bishop takes a6 is the best move here, and rook takes a6. The black knight clearly has better prospects than the white bishop. Korchnoi says black's advantage would have been merely theoretical here. So in this position, that knight should have been chopped off the board by Kasparov, but he played queen e3. Queen c5. Black, by retaining his knight, obtains additional possibilities of fighting for an advantage. In such a situation, it's easy to slip up, especially when feeling grieved by the unsuccessful outcome of the opening. Because now it is not good to take the knight, because then there is queen takes, f takes, and rook takes, and this is bad for white. White has a very difficult rook endgame with three weaknesses. The pawns on a3, c3, and e3 are weak. So after queen c5, you cannot take on a6. Kasparov saw that and swapped the queens. Knight takes, rook fb1, rook fd8, rook b4, rook d6, the bishop all the way back to f1, king f8, and a4. Kasparov says that rook a to b1 would have been better. Giving up a pawn, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, and rook takes on c3. The exchange of the queenside pawns and the transition into the ending with 3 pawns against 4 on the king side is an important drawing resource for white. So with that move, rook a to b1, this move, giving up a pawn, white would have had good drawing chances. But instead of rook a b1, he played a4. Rook a5, very instructive move, eliminating the threat of a4, a5 from white, and fixing that weakness on a4. Bishop b5 should have been played here according to Kasparov, but he played g3. This is move 30. Kasparov was very low on time, did not have time to think about his moves. King e7, king g2, and f5, securing the e4 square for the knight. Because Kasparov says it's not good to play f3 to control that e4 square because of rook d2 check, king g1, and then rerouting the knight to e5, knight d7, bishop b5, and knight e5 when the black pieces become very active, explains Kasparov. So after f5, it's not good to play f3. Bishop b5 was played by Kasparov, and rook d2, an over-hasty move from Korchnoi. Black should have first centralized his king. And now rook a to b1 is possible again, exploiting the drawback of black's previous move, the weakening of the b6 pawn. This gives white drawing chances. Kasparov missed his chance after that over-hasty move from Korchnoi. He played rook d4 instead. Those rooks were traded. And now it's up to you. How does black win a pawn here? Put the video on pause and have a look. Do you find that shot that Kasparov missed but Korchnoi found black to play and win a pawn. And there it is on the 34th move. Knight takes a4, a simple tactical stroke which takes play in a winning rook endgame for black. If you take the piece, then what is there? Yes, indeed, I'm sure you saw it. There is b6, b5, winning the piece back. The bishop cannot go because then the rook is unprotected. So after knight takes a4, Kasparov took on a4, rook takes b5, winning the piece back, and rook a7 check, king d6. This is a winning endgame for black with an extra pawn. Rook h7, desperately trying to look for counterplay. h5, saving that pawn. Rook g7, attacking the g-pawn. Rook d5, attacking the d-pawn. Rook takes, and there goes the b-pawn, marching up the board. The king has come to the rescue, and now rook takes d4 is possible. As Korchnoi says, it's a question of style. This move would also have won without difficulty, but Korchnoi decided to push the b-pawn instead. If white hurries back with the rook, then there is rook b5 behind the pawn, winning for black. In the game, king e3 was played. The b-pawn keeps running, and be careful, don't play king d3, because then there is rook b5, and the b-pawn is unstoppable. It will go through to queen. So after b3, Kasparov had to play king d2 instead, but that gives up on the d-pawn. King c3, at least the b-pawn is controlled. b2, king takes, rook check, king c3, there goes the f-pawn, and h4 on the 46th move. Kasparov writes, here the curtain could have been lowered, but through inertia I continued to resist. Let's see the remaining moves of the game. f4, rook g5, rook check, king d4, a pair of pawns is swapped, rook back to e3, rook h6, king e7, h5, e5 check, king d5, and the last move of the game, f4, f3, and the f-pawn is unstoppable. A painful defeat, writes Kasparov, but 4 successive draws brought me back to normal. And in the end, Kasparov won the match quite easily, with 4 wins, 1 loss, that was this game, and 6 draws, and advanced to the candidates final, where he beat Vasily Smyslov to qualify for a match against world champion Anatoly Karpov. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.